Hello, good evening, and welcome to your most authoritative business and economic analysis program live here on TV3. This is Business Focus, live here on TV3. My name is Parkus Yasari. Thanks very much for joining us on the program. Tonight, we will be focusing on the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation. There's been a number of issues arising from the state entity. We've heard in the media of a turf war between the Chief Executive Officer, Dr. KK Sarpong, and the Chairman of the Board, Freddie Blay, over procurement issues. A number of issues have arisen out of that. I'm sure you know that this is not an isolated case. We've seen such disagreements over the past few weeks or months or years between chief executives as well as board chairman. What's the way forward? How do we address this challenge? Is the presidency going to step into this matter? And how is it likely to affect the operations of the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation? We'll also tie that in with the Public Interest and Accountability Committee raising red flags over some $3.8 million that the GNPC, we're told, gave to government in the maritime boundary disputes. Quite a big issue that has come up for debate. PIAC says they think it's a wrong decision for government to take that amount of money to settle legal fees in the maritime boundary disputes between Ghana and the Ivory Coast. We're going to talk about this. We're also going to look at the commodities market as well as the stock market to find out what's the latest on that market and how that's impacting on Ghana. We've got all these and many more coming up in the next 45 minutes. We'll take a short break. When we return, bring you the very latest in business news stories making headlines, and I'll introduce our guest to you. right, so you're welcome back to your most authoritative business and economic analysis program live here on TV3. This is Business Focus. So over the last 2 days, there's been a lot of talk on social media. There's a lot of trends. There have been lots of trends on social media with regards to the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation. Letters have been circulating. And this has got to do with certain disagreements between the board chairman of the company, that's Freddie Blay, and the chief executive officer, Dr. KK Sarpong. Now, pressure is mounting on Dr. KK Sarpong to reverse a decision that seeks to bring the procurement functions of the corporation's chief finance officer directly under him. Now, a memo signed by the GNPC board instructing the chief finance officer to hand over all procurement duties directly to him and to seize the award of new contracts forthwith. Now, in the latest development, Mr. Freddie Blay is demanding an apology and an immediate withdrawal of a letter Dr. KK Sarpong wrote to the chief finance officer of the firm over the recruitment of a procurement manager. Now, in a letter cited by TV3, responding to a letter addressed to him earlier, Mr. Freddie Blay noted that the chief executive officer, Dr. KK Sarpong, by his singular action was being subversive by sidestepping the decisions of the board. The latest we know is that a letter has been sent to the presidency by Mr. KK Sarpong, of which Mr. Freddie Blay has responded to. As I stated earlier, this is not an isolated case. Over the last few months, we've heard of disagreements between board chairmen as well as chief executive officers. Let me quickly introduce our guest to you tonight. Migdad Mohammed is a senior analyst with the Institute of Energy Security. Migdad, good to have you in the studio. Duncan Amwa is executive director of the Consumers COPEC, right? Help me out.
The Chamber of Petroleum.
Chamber of Petroleum Consumers. Yes. And I'm going to tie this whole discussion in with PIAC's own disagreement over some $3.8 million that the GNPC said to have given to government for the settlement of legal fees for the maritime boundary dispute with the Ivory Coast. Has raised a lot of red flags, and we're going to talk about this also. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time. Migdad, I'll start off with you. I'm sure you've been monitoring this whole GNPC fracas. What's your own opinion on it?
Well, I think it's an embarrassment and it's unacceptable. Given the competitive nature of the industry, given the people that we want to compare GNPC to, the international oil companies, the ENIs, the Talos, and the Cosmos and others, you wouldn't expect that GNPC will be doubling in such a tough war. And I think that the gentlemen involved are individuals who, in their private capacities, have excelled in whatever they are doing. What is the problem here is the individual political chemistry or personal chemistries between them. We want them to know that the people of Ghana and the investments we have made in GNPC is bigger and more important to us than their individual differences in the offices they occupy. And if you see the statement IES put out, we are calling on the president, who is the appointing authority, that he should call the two men to order, because we don't think that it sends the right signals. Going forward in the medium to long term, it could have an impact on the reputation of GNPC when it is entering into transactions, which will require their partners to do due diligence. No one will want to invest in a company or run into partnership where there's a top-level managerial crisis, and you wouldn't know who among the top is mandated to take what decision and so on and so forth. But for us, we saw this thing playing out right from 2018, I think May.
I'll come back to you. Duncan, what are your immediate thoughts on this development story?
Like Migdad indicated, it is not surprising. And again, we've had instances in the past where some of these boardroom wranglings and bordering on infractions and procurement breaches have gone unpunished. And so the signal is sent to the corporate governance, community. If you recall, just last year, we had a lot of issues with Ghana Cylinder Manufacturing Company, where the board was seen certain infractions, and they thought that what the CEO was doing was inappropriate. Eventually, a committee is put in there. The committee's report, as we speak, is not known to any human being other than the ministry. We've requested, we are not being given. Even the board members who requested for that committee's report have been denied. And so I'm citing this to suggest that it is not an isolated instance. These things have been ongoing, but as to whether as a country we are able to find solutions to these wranglings when they occur. Mind you, there are supposed to be approval limits if you go to corporate governance structures. What a CEO alone can approve, what a line manager can approve, what would need a board's approval. These lines or limits are not in doubt at all. Even when you go to the ministries, there are lines of approval. There are things that the chief director can authorize immediately to be done. There are things he would need to seek the approval of his minister. There are things that the minister may even have to go to the extent of getting cabinet approval and all of that. So there are approval limits. And we are thinking that what is bringing all of this up now, if you ask me to summarize, may border on just a chop thing or a simple agenda for someone to be pushed out.
And in this case, who wants who to be pushed out?
I have seen in the past, if you recall, there was a list that made rounds some 3-4 weeks ago.
People who had reached their
some
retirement
CEOs
age.
who were said to have reached a certain retirement age and were supposed to leave and all of them. Tentatively, the Ministry of Information comes out to say that there's not been any such development. But you've seen about 2-3 of them leave already.
The NHIS board,
NHI,
the
yes.
GPHA.
Exactly. And so it gives you the signal that that list may not have been in isolation. And whatever it is that is even driving this open display of power between Mr. KK Sapon and Mr. Freddie Blay must be something really huge, because these two gentlemen are not novices when it comes to business, when it comes to politics
as well. Duncan, I'll come back to you. McDowell, you say you saw this coming in?
Well, we all read, we have read the GMPC Act. We know the functions of the board. We know the functions of the chief executive officer and so on and so forth. But over the period, not all the boards have been assertive of the authorities that the GMPC Act gave them. Most of them have been sleeping boards that give the duties or responsibilities of their office to the CEO. And that convention has been there for quite a while. So we would have expected that if there was going to be a departure from that, it would have been done in a manner that would be respectful of the office of the chief executive officer, so that they can reach and understand. The point I was going to make was in May 2018, when the board chairman, Mr. Freddie Blay, alone, as it were, was in Russia signing the Rosneft deal with the Russians. He was accompanied by the Ghana ambassador to Russia, and Dr. Amin Anta, the deputy minister of energy in charge of petroleum, and then some 3 managers of GMPC with the CEO out of the picture. Yes, the board has a lot of powers. In fact, the CEO is supposed to act on the authority of the board.
But he derives his authority from
exactly,
the board.
And he takes the board is actually in charge of the general management of the company, given the GMPC and the nature of the GMPC Act. But it does not mean that you reduce the office of the chief executive officer to an errand boy.
Is that what's happening?
Well, that is how it looks like when you have a situation. And of course, the chief executive officer himself has done some actions which has been a slap on the face of corporate discipline. For example, if the public relations officer of GMPC were the one he sacked, will he take the role of the PRO for himself? Of course, he will quickly get someone to act as PRO, but procurement, you direct it to yourself. And procurement is a very sensitive component of public sector. This is not a private company. It's a company that is in holding trust. The resources of this country in the ground, the hydrocarbons are in your hands, in trust for the people of Ghana, of course, on the authority of the president. So where questions of procurement comes and you take it up upon yourself to be the procurement officer in such a manner until such time, as the memo says, as you appoint a substantive person, it raises a lot of questions. But like my brother said, Duncan, these are not
isolated cases.
These are not isolated cases. It's high time the president, with whom the buck stops, calls this men to order. Or if they can't iron out their differences and work in the interest of Ghana, it will be best they are booted out. But there's this very important point I want to make, which goes to the core of the management practices in state institutions, which is the appointment of political party executives into key state organizations of that sort. It is not just limited to this particular administration. Dr. Kwabena Ejei of the NDC was the GET Fund board chairman. Dr. Potofi was at NADMO, and Mr. Freddie Blay is now heading GMPC. And these are very key state institutions. I think that we have to come to an understanding, even though the appointment is at the discretion of the president, subject to the approval of the Public Service Commission. It's important that we make considerations. We are considering the type of people. Yes, they are qualified by the GMPC Act, people with integrity, they have no criminal record, and there's no bank ruling of bankruptcy against them and all of that. But we must look at where they come from. Obviously, if Mr. Freddie Blay were he not the GMPC, the ruling party's chairman, his response and accommodation of the internal issues will have perhaps been different. This is because he has an extra power which is beyond the offices of GMPC, and of course he's also clothed with the legitimate authority to act in the way he acts within the GMPC structure. But it is very important to know that there's a lot of emotional intelligence that is needed to be used at play when you are managing a lot of people, especially people who may have been appointed by a president who didn't care about the differences you had before he appointed you. All he needs is that a job must be done, and in his estimation, he thinks that you are the right people to do the job. So when you get there, all other petty bickering differences must be put aside. You get the results. When you get out there, you can do the dirty stuff you want to do to each other.
I'm going to come back to you on how we can address this matter going forward. Duncan, is it about time the president stepped into this matter?
Because we at COPEC would be happy to see not just the president acting. Would equally be happy to see the Office of the Special Prosecutor get in this. We'll be happy to see EOCO go in there. You are discussing GMPC in lieu of the fact that not very long ago, we're looking at $104 million having been spent on what they call capacity building.
Yeah.
In fact, if you look at some of the things, the expenditure they
it's one of the issues we're going to be looking at.
Our monies to. Whilst you said this evening, there's an issue of Ghana Gas being owed some 760, and we are not paying, and there's Dumso rearing his ugly head, and you have GNPC getting so much money sometimes from, our oil exploration activities, and you look at what they sink these monies into. It leaves you wondering whether there's real accountability or value for money, as far as the object of the company, GMPC itself, is concerned. I do think that this is the best opportunity for any forensic investigations be done.
Is there anything wrong with a chief executive officer to be involved in procurement when he thinks that he's got the qualifications and the know-how to be able to do that?
In recent past in this country, if you recall the famous SNIT OBS suit procurement, the former government, there was an issue of whether the board had given approval or the former managing director, Thompson, did go on his own. Invariably, the board will be brought in. And so where you find the current NPP chairman having difficulties, I'm sure would have to do with the fact that if you go alone to engage in procurement, whilst we at the board have no idea, what happens 10 years when we are no longer in the service of GNPC and these issues come up? So Bakwesi, there's integrity to be protected. And then again, those of us who also believe that sometimes there's the one chendi, bit. How much are you making out of this business? Is it something that could be made much more transparent than it currently is? I opened this conversation by saying that there are approval limits that will need to be respected. At what level can the chief executive take a decision that says, at $50,000 spending, my office is cloaked with enough powers to take that decision? If I have to go to $1 million, I'm in agreement. No matter its shape, form, or whatever, I need to go to the board for approval. If that approving limits are not clearly established, then you have this conflict where the day-to-day administration, where the chief executive has to act, you may find the board interfering. Mind you, the board only gets to sit every quarter. And so it cannot be that for normal day procurement, right, where we need pens, toner cartridges, the board would have to come to sit before approvals are given. So these limits would have to be clearly spelled out, especially the state boards, so that boards do not become class prefects to CEOs. CEOs are usually appointed with a certain performance expectation. This is where the company is. This is where we expect you to move it to. So they have a certain responsibility. Now, if you have a class prefect standing over their shoulders, what would happen is that whereas the CEO may be able to take a quick decision and say, look, let's be able to do this and turn around quickly and make money, the board would have to take a longer time dragging because it's a 7-member board, 11-member board. They would have to deliberate, come to an agreement. Sometimes board decisions may take as long as a year. And so there are decisions that ought to be made, critical decisions as far as the state-owned enterprises are concerned. But at what point should these limits be clearly established? Should the CEO do $1 million
GNPC's own performance ever since Dr. Keke Sarpong took office, and to find out if really these boardroom wranglings and internal conflicts have impacted on the company's operations? But Migdad, why is procurement such a major issue for a lot of companies? Why should procurement be a subject of bickering and confusion between the chief executive and the board chairman?
One of the most important questions people ask, as ordinary Ghanaians will ask on any matter, is this the best we could use our money for? If this is the best we could use our money for, was that at the lowest cost available? These are the questions that prompt the need for procurement, and why the procurement process must be as transparent as possible, especially where the monies which is to be spent is not monies which are individuals' monies. These are monies which are supposed to go to touch the lives of the people on the ground. So where you have questions surrounding procurement, let's say some breaches were done, some underhand dealings where you could have gotten a tin of milk, for example, at 2 cedis, you are getting it. And I know an authority that GMPC procured a tin of milk at about 7 cedis under the sacked procurement manager. These are some of the factors that precipitated the need to set the manager aside. But what has been the problem is the corresponding reaction from the CEO taking over that responsibility. So where you have questions surrounding procurement, and the finance ministry has raised questions about the procurement practices in GMPC, it is not following the standard practices. There have been a lot of infractions, and there's a need for them to look at where and how it is happening, and whether there are individual private beneficiaries of the system. Where generally people ask questions about procurement where some of the steps have been jumped, which will prompt a query from the ministry, whether from finance or from energy. So when we hear of procurement, we know there's money involved, there's money on the table to be taken, but that money must be taken for the purpose at the least available cost.
In terms of dealing with this controversy, is this a matter that should reach the presidency? What's the energy ministry doing? Is the minister not able to deal with this matter decisively?
Well, this is not the first time it has been happening at that level. For example, I know for a fact that the sector minister has raised questions about his own relationship with the CEO of GMPC. And if he himself has not been able to resolve his own headache with the sector, with the CEO, and given the pedigree of the board chairman, you understand why it will take the president to come in. The board chairman is not just any ordinary helpful businessman who was appointed board chairman. This is the ruling party's national chairman. He himself can make indirect appointments in the government. So you have to look at the weights of the individuals involved and who to call in to mediate. But there's this important factor that IES will raise in their statement. These wranglings, it has costs. And unfortunately, Nigeria has made itself the ignominious rising example of all the such news. You know, the NNPC, the group managing director and the minister of state in charge of, they had serious conflicts which caused the country in excess of $500 million in terms of investments. Because for a long time, investors who come into the country didn't know who to deal with because of the friction until Buhari, based on the memo written to him, by the Minister of State, and it leaked into the media with litany of procurement
Breaches.
infractions. They called them together and resolved the issues, and they are making some progress. So
Right.
it has costs.
Please, let me just tie it in with this issue, and I like Duncan to start off with me, where we told that the Public Interest and Accountability Committee has raised red flags on a decision by the government to use some $3.8 million of funds from the Ghana National Petroleum Corporation for the cost of litigation on Ghana's maritime boundary dispute with Cote d'Ivoire. Now, according to PIAC, the cost of the entire dispute must be funded by government, since the corporation is just an institution and a player in the industry. The GNPC reported in a PIAC annual report of 2017 that it spent about $3.8 million from legal fees, secretarial and other expenditures during the litigation at the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea at The Hague. You raised issues about GNPC's own expenditure over the years, and this is one critical area that PIAC has raised red flags over.
So, Pakwasi, if you look at the energy chain, on one side there's so much debt, and the VRA, the GridCos, the IPPs, even downstream BDC legacy debts. On the other, there's so much money to be spent. GNPC, where the hydrocarbon funds are sometimes lodged, right? And then you look at, like McDad suggested, the most prudent use of these funds. Do we get value for money from GNPC? My answer would be an outright no. I do have a fair idea in certain instances where normal television procurement runs into millions of dollars. And you end up asking, could we have gotten it for less? Yes. Could we have applied those monies for alternate, uses? Could we have empowered GNPC such that the new oil blocks that we discover, right? They will take the initiative to build their own FPSOs. They will take the initiative to even bring in high-level, skilled personnel to go into exploration and production. Unfortunately, since the establishment of GNPC, some 60 years or so gone, it looks as though we only trot around the issues. When there's money, they collect the monies, and then they lose focus altogether. There's Black Stars to be sponsored, and we couldn't have found any corporate sponsorship other than the state's oil money. And so what they apply these scarce resources that the country needs badly for other sectors of development is what is in question here. That's why I said this is a very good opportunity for the investigative agencies, the EOCOs, the Special Prosecutor's Office, to get in there, do a proper forensic audit or value for money audit at GNPC. You can predate it back to 80s, 90s, whatever. You may be able to establish that of the over 60 billion or $20 billion that have gone through GNPC, 80% of that has been wasted. If you ask for audit trail, or if you ask for receipts or invoices to things that they say they have applied our monies to. The same PIAC was clear and categorical last year that there were schools that had been, written in documents as having been built in communities. You go to the communities and ask, where are these schools? There's not even a block. Yet the monies have already been used, appropriated.
And no one has been prosecuted.
No one has
been held liable.
Clearly, the way and manner GNPC would use funds accruing to Ghanaians, I think it leaves a lot more to be desired. And some of us would have expected that even after bringing in Tullow for the Jubilee, the next other oil finds or blocks that we were awarding, GNPC should have been one of the key bidders, right, to ensure that whatever we rake in, there is local retention. Unfortunately, we're going to sign, production sharing agreements with these multinationals, and sometimes Ghana is getting 12%. Meanwhile, GNPC on its own, even if it doesn't have the initial funding capital, could be able to raise money to go into this, but it wouldn't. So it will be dancing around this core mandate. It would now engage in the fanfare. Black Stars would need to go play a football match. GNPC is chartering planes. You ask yourself,
$8 million.
I mean, clearly, either they have lost focus or there is nobody checking anybody there. So, as usual, when the monies come, let's find a way to, dissipate these funds, and then the other sectors of the energy bit chain would suffer. Ghana gas is bleeding.
Right.
Yet GMPC is spending $104 million.
We've got to wrap up this conversation.
Clearly, that's not the
Migdad, you stay with me. Migdad will stay with me for another conversation, and as you may be aware, the Institute of Energy Security, of which Migdad belongs, has stated that the delay in announcing the takeover of the ECG by the Power Distribution Services is due to the latter's refusal to provide a bond guarantee. Now, the Millennium Development Authority announced in January that the PDS was scheduled to take over ECG on February 1, but the deal was postponed. Now, Power Distribution Services, whose major shareholder is Filipino company Miracle Consortium, was expected to take over the ECG on 1st February, but the takeover has been postponed by the Millennium Development Authority, and already the IES is raising some questions about that delay. We'll go on a short break. When we return, we'll delve deeper into this subject. But thank you very much, Duncan, for your time. Sure. We'll be back shortly. Business Focus, your weekly business and economic analysis program, live here on TV3. So the Institute of Energy Security has stated that the delay in announcing the takeover of the Electricity Company of Ghana by Power Distribution Services is due to the latter's refusal to provide a bond guarantee. Now, the Millennium Development Authority announced in January that PDS was scheduled to take over ECG on February 1, but the deal was postponed. Now, the Power Distribution Services, whose major shareholders is Filipino company Miracle Consortium, was expected to take over the ECG on the 1st of February. Now, the takeover has, however, been postponed by the Millennium Development Authority. Now, my dad is with the Institute of Energy Security. He's still with me in the studio. Migdad, you said there are still difficulties with this particular deal?
Yes, because one of the preconditions, very, very known precondition for the takeover, is the availability of resources for the takeover, the proof that you can raise the money, that the $480 million to take to do the turnarounds, technical, operational, managerial turnarounds that is required in the takeover. But we know that as at February, there is no proof to show that that has been provided by PDS. What we fear is that there's a possibility that when they take over, they will use the assets of ECG to do that, to raise that bond, which will have been a short change, because if that were all it took, we could have done it ourselves.
And you're saying the ECG is refusing to provide or issue a bond guarantee?
It is not ECG.
Okay.
The one taking over is supposed to provide that guarantee, that bond guarantee, that I have what it takes to take over the assets and manage it and make these investments in the first 5 years, as is part of the agreement.
Right.
So when we schedule that by February 2019, you are taking over, and the time comes, you have not shown that proof of the existence of that bond of the funds, that it can be done, there's a need for them to relook at the timelines they have given themselves. The second factor too is that in the concession agreement, most of us in civil society, and we are guilty, we were utmostly concerned about job losses. And we were a little blinded on the issue of tariffs, which is very important in the scheme of affairs. In fact, tariff is the most important consideration we will have to look at when we are talking of this concession, because when a private person comes in, some of the management practices will change, and if it will change, it will mean that consumers will have to at some point pay realistic tariffs. And when we are supposed to pay realistic tariffs, we would have to make people understand what will change as the management is changing. But we did not discuss tariffs, whether when Miracle take over, PDS take over, the management of ECG, what are the tariff structures. Of course, PURC will continue to be in the picture as the public utility policeman of a sort, to ensure that the tariffs which are going to be passed on to final consumers are tariffs which are reflective of the cost of producing the power, transmitting and distributing it. But we did not discuss it until last minute.
Is it something that we have much say about, especially when we know of the amount of debt within the sector?
Yes, it is the issue of tariff in this sector. We can't do that debts in this sector, but it is like how a mouse will eat off your palms when you are sleeping. You bite, you blow. You bite, you blow. So there's a need to strike a balance between paying realistic tariffs that are reflective of the costs of purchasing the power, distributing and and so on and so forth. And then the reality of people not being economic variables. They are human beings who feel the pinch when they pay more. So we have heard of the minority ranking member project that it's possible that we could pay as much as 60% more for tariff. And it is informed by, I think it's on the high. If there are going to be increments, it's going to be gradual, spread over a period of time before we peak at a point. And these increments will be occasioned by the fact that currently ECG buys power from the independent power producers at 59 cents per kilowatt per hour and sell it at 42 cents per kilowatt per hour. You buy at 59 and sell at 42 cents per kilowatt per hour, and this is dollars. Already, dollars simply means that you are in a disadvantage because you come and sell it in cedis, and after selling it in cedis, you now melt, as it were, the cedis back into dollars to pay back your producers.
That's a lot of loss.
That's a lot of loss. So in the natural demand and supply equation, you have lost 17 cents. And then now we come to the forex, where the cedi suffers against the dollar. It means that your debts to your producers is piling up. And that is not a sustainable thing that you will expect that the new management will continue. Because if they come to continue the same thing, the same results, really no ECG, that cost ECG debts is what they would be facing. Because for the first 6 months of 2018, the second half report has not come yet. For the first 6 months of 2018, ECG's accumulated debts as a result of the unrealistic nature of these tariff arrangements is 1.1 billion. So just by rough mathematics, you can say for the first 6 months, 1.1, the whole year will be about roughly 2.2 billion debts, fresh debts. This is independent of the old debts that government is making efforts to chip at. So yes, we would want them to, as much as possible, quicken things and get things done, and get the concession process done. But it's also very important that some of the key questions which hang around the concession must be addressed. We have addressed the issue of jobs.
For instance, what?
The issue of jobs have been addressed. Right. Then the second is the issue of tariffs. And then the third factor is about the long term, the number of the current staff strength, how they will invest in training of the Ghanaian staff, so that if the concession runs out in the next 20 years, we have equally competent Ghanaians who have learnt a lot within the concession period and are able to and capable of taking over ECG and running it the way and manner it has been run with good results for the people of Ghana. But the question that is on the minds of a lot of people is the tariffs. And even before these questions came up, I am aware that NEDCO has written to PURC that there's the need for their current tariff structure to be reviewed, because they are incurring debts and making losses and all of that. And it comes down to the very final point I want to make about the politics in it. You know, we can promise when you are campaigning, we see the suffering of the people and we come with the intention of helping them. But we must not, if you cut your tongue and chew it, you've not eaten any meat. If we give people reduced power, whether as residential users or industrial users, and this power we are giving them at that reduced cost means that we are accumulating debt for some people to come and pay tomorrow, as we are paying those who used power unrealistically yesterday. It will have simply meant that it's a whole cycle. Yesterday, some people used power and petroleum products unrealistically, and they accumulated debts. Today, we are paying ESLA. Just first half of 2018, 1.1 billion debts. It's likely that some generation will come tomorrow and pay. And we are happy that we are paying low cost for tariffs. So where it comes to implementing promises we made, there has to be a fine balance between, yes, making people comfortable, but not doing it by scapegoating the accounts of state companies like ECG. For example, if government intended to look at the review of tariffs downwards so that consumers, whether residential or industrial users, can have the benefit of low tariffs, government could have best done it from their own taxes in the power structure rather than from the books of ECG, so that ECG wouldn't have to go and buy power at 59 cents and sell it at 42 cents, because there's a reduction which has been made with the approval of the PURC, of course, and it means that they are making a loss of 17 cents
so
per
now
kilowatt
with the
per hour.
delay that, or the postponement we've seen, are you confident this deal will go through before the end of the first quarter?
Well, I don't want to preempt what is to come. What I know is that there is some work to be done, and if that work must be done, it must be done well. And if it must be done well, it won't require us in civil society to be on the shoulders of those in the arena and give them undue pressure. But what they must know is that they will not be doing these transactions alone. They have watchmen on the walls of the energy sector watching and following proceedings keenly, hoping that whatever the product of that concession is, and eventually if it is handed over to PDS, it will be something which will be in the ultimate interest of the Ghanaian people. And the Ghanaian people here, I mean the ordinary Ghanaian user of tariff, who expects that with a change in management, there will be more efficiency in the system. Those software failures in ECG, bill limiters, where people buy prepaid for 50 Ghana, and in 2-3 days it is finished, and then it is because the software is problematic, will be addressed, so that Gridco will get the receivables which are logged with ECG piling up. They can get their monies and invest in their maintenance schedules, which they have missed for some time. This will mean that no part of Accra, or anywhere for that matter, will sleep in darkness, because a transformer is obsolete and there's no money to have it replaced or serviced properly. These are some of the things we expect to see.
Migdad, I've got to say a big thank you to you. Migdad Mohammed is a senior analyst with the Institute of Energy Security, helping us to do some analysis on the takeover of the ECG by Meralco, which is a consortium. It was supposed to have taken over ECG by the 1st of February, but there's been a delay, and according to Migdad, it's as a result of a refusal to issue a bond guarantee. We'll see how that pans out in the coming weeks. We'll take a short break. This is Business Focus, live here on TV3. We'll take a short break. When we return, we'll wrap up. All right, you're welcome back to your most authoritative business and economic analysis program. We quickly will wrap up the program, but before that, I've been joined in the studio by Winslow Sakifio. He's head of capital market at First Bank Financial Services, to help us do the stock as well as the commodities market. Winslow, we're hard pressed for time. Quickly, let's look at the stocks as well as let's start with the stocks. Okay. I hear they are performing a bit better now.
Yes, even though the general index is still in the negative, there was a slight improvement last week, because the petroleum stocks are beginning to pick up. You know, crude prices are rising a bit, so it provides some sort of cushion for them. Right. The smaller banks too are beginning to do a bit better. Last year was mainly the big banks because of the banking reforms, and investors felt...
Smaller in terms of what? What's
smaller in terms of their deposits, their asset base. Okay. You know, we have the very big banks like GCB, and then EcoBank, and and then we have the second tier, the Carl Bank, Societe Generale, and all that. So they are now providing some support, because now the 400 million issue is about solved. So investors are now putting back some confidence into the smaller ones. Okay,
quickly, let's look at the commodities market.
Commodities, you know, crude is still seeing a gradual increase in price, because OPEC members have decided to cut supplies. And last week there was a malfunction in one of Saudi Arabia's offshore drilling sites, and that's providing some support for the price, because supply is going to be affected, and that would help push the price a little. Currently it's at 65.45, and it might go up. Gold, unfortunately, because there is some understanding about the US-China trade dispute, and it's sort of removing the uncertainty on the market. For cocoa, even though there's a forecast for bumper harvest, we are not seeing it affecting the prices negatively.
All right. Quickly back to the stocks. What are the projections for this week? Are we likely to see some more?
Yes, so we'll see the petroleum stock still carrying the day. Last year, Total did fairly well compared to the other stocks, and it looks like investors are shifting, and uncertainty in the market is reduced, so we are seeing equity investors coming back to the market.
I'd love us to talk about the city. Unfortunately, we're hard pressed for time. Maybe we'll do that next week, God willing. Thank you very much for watching Business Focus. This has been your most authoritative business and economic analysis program. Thanks very much to you, Winslow Sakifio, who's head of capital market at First Bank Financial Services. We're also joined by Migdad Mohammed, who's a senior analyst with the Institute of Energy Security, as well as Duncan Amwa, executive director of the Chamber of Petroleum Consumers. They helped us look at the issue of GNPC. Thanks very much for your time. We'll take The news at 7 with Natalie and Alfred. And God willing, same time next week, we'll be back again with another edition of your favorite program, Business Focus.